sanji chudan soji chonam lai chanchu pardo dani chamsu chi dagi jinsu jibe sunam chi rolai pinchir sanji drubar shu sanji chudan soji chonam lai chanchu pardo Nani jamsu chi dagi jinsu jibe sunam chi rolai pinchir sanji drubar shu sanji chudan sunji lai chanchu pardo dani jamsu chi dagi jinsu jibe sunam chi rolai pinchir sanji drubar shu simjin tamjin dewa dan devi jodan dembar churchi dungar dan dungar chi jodan chawar churchi dungar mebe dewa tamba dan mindrawar churchi Nirin cha dan dan charvya dan yom chenpo la nebar chur chi sim jin tam jin dewa dan devi jo dan dembar chur chi dungar dan dungar chi jo dan chawar chur chi dungar mebe dewa tamba dan mindrawar chur chi Nirin cha dan dan charvya dan yom chenpo la nebar chur chi sim jin tam jin dewa dan devi dembar chur chi dungar dan dungar chi jo dan chawar chur chi dungar mebe dewa tamba dan mindrawar chur chi Nirin cha dan dan charvya dan yom chenpo la nebar chur chi Chomden den jambe yang lai chang tsai lo kange lo dren dren nye dren dren nye dra nam da rab sar ve chi nye tun gun chi xin si chi ni chi to kara le bam zi kanda si be tsun ra ma ri mun tu ma dung ra chi sir ve ro zo kun la pu chi tar se yang la chu chu yang den song Zhudar che zhu nyu mu ni long le che cha zhu zhu zi jing ma ri mu si dung ra nyu gu chi ni chun zi ra zhe nam. Dun ne ta jing sa ju tar sun yun den lu zu gyar si tu yu gu ju zha ju dang ju ni jing da lu mu si ren jiang bei yang lai du zi den ju ji chen ra bu zi ji da lu de mu men ba rab sir ne ga dan den ju xiong lu dou ba ye lu zhi bo be nang wa zi du su na sam ji me xie ra ba zhi jin ma ji men ga nam ge ngo ni so so rang ri yi xi ju yu wa tu sum ge we yum la chang zi lu Homage à la
Homage to the Bhagavati. Thus have I heard. Once the Glorious One was residing at Vulture's Peak in Rajagriha, together with a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Glorious One abided evenly in the samadhi of the aspects of phenomena called appearance of the profound. Also, at the same time, the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, beholding the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, observed that even the five aggregates are empty of substance. Then, by the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva. How should a son of the lineage or a daughter of the lineage train who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom? Addressed in this way, the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said this to the venerable son of Sharadvati, Shariputra, The son of the lineage or the daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom should observe in this way. They should view correctly that even the 5 aggregates are empty of substance. Matter is emptiness. Emptiness is matter. Emptiness is not other than matter. Matter is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, apperception, conditioning, and consciousness are empty. Thus, Shariputra, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, not produced, not ceased, stainless, not free of stain, undiminished, unfulfilled. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no matter, no feeling, no apperception, no conditioning, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no phenomenon, no eye constituent until no mental constituent, up to including no mental consciousness constituent. No ignorance, no extinction of ignorance until no aging and death, up to and including no extinction of aging and death. There is no suffering, origin, cessation, or path, no wisdom, no attainment, no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because bodhisattvas have no attainment, they rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Their minds having no obscuration, they have no fear, and passing entirely beyond falsity, they completely pass beyond sorrow. All the Buddhas who abide in the 3 times by relying too on the perfection of wisdom have fully awakened into the unsurpassable, true, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom is the mantra of great insight, the mantra of the unsurpassable, the mantra peering with the peerless, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering. Because it does not deceive, it should be known to be true. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is stated, Teata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhisoha. Shariputra, in that way, bodhisattva mahasattvas should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the glorious one arose from that samadhi and praised the noble Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva mahasattva. Well done, son of the lineage, it is like that. Son of the lineage, it is like that, just as you have taught it, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced. Even the Tathagatas admire it. After the glorious one had thus spoken, the venerable son of Sharadvati, the bodhisattva, mahasattva, Avalokiteshvara, and all those surrounding, and the entire world, with its gods, humans, demigods, and Gandharvas, in admiration, praise the words of the glorious one. Teata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhisoha. Okay. I'm looking for the most recent version. I forgot my paper. I was looking for it. Thank you very much. I must have what I'm looking for somewhere, but I can't find it. I propose that we read the text a bit together, that we look at the text. So you remember the general structure of the text. First, there's the title, followed by the homage offered by the translator. Then what is called the common prologue follows. Common because I think I mentioned it to you already. This concerns a presentation that we find in texts, often sutras begin with this phrase, "Thus have I heard." Thus have I heard once. Da, da, da. It's a phrase that we find at the beginning of all the texts. So we can see concerning the history of the gathering of the Buddha's teachings and how they were safeguarded for future generations. According to history, the Buddha himself gave instructions concerning how to preserve his teachings. He asked that there be a council held that gathered together 500 arhats, 500 accomplished masters. Shortly after the Buddha's parinirvana, there were numerous arhats, accomplished disciples of the Buddha who had realized, who had attained the realization of arhathood. And when they heard that the Buddha had left this world, they decided to leave this world as well. They entered into nirvana, abandoning all residue. Oh, residue, that's a nice translation. All remains of the world. The great disciples of the Buddha, whose mission was to gather the Buddha's teachings and preserve them for the future, wished to follow the Buddha's recommendations. And the primary master was Mahakashapa. He sought out all the arhats remaining, and he found 499. He was short one arhat in order to gather the council. Among the Buddhist disciples, who were the most likely to be able to quickly attain the state of arhathood, there was the Buddha's assistant, who was named Ananda. He was the Buddha's cousin. The community had chosen him to support and aid the Buddha. He accepted this role on the condition that the Buddha include him, that he could be present for all of the Buddha's teachings, and that if ever the Buddha were to teach something in private, he would also be able to hear the teachings later on, that the Buddha would repeat them to him. That was his condition. And he did indeed accompany the Buddha, entered the Buddha's community during the 20th year after the Buddha's enlightenment. To encourage him to practice and meditate. In fact, the reason why Ananda had not yet attained enlightenment is because he felt he was so privileged to be so close to the Buddha. And he didn't really apply himself to meditative practice with great diligence, and thus he had not attained the realization of an arhat. So in a way, to force him to do so, the community accused him of having been lacking in respect toward the Buddha, and essentially they excluded him from the community, shut him out, basically. They said that when he was serving the Buddha, he put his feet on the Buddha's clothes, for example. They expressed certain reproaches and then and threw him out. And so then he found himself by himself, and he said to himself, well, there's nothing left to do other than meditate. So he did so. And then he quite quickly realized the state of arhathood. And then after this, with the clairvoyance that accompanies it, he saw that it was a strategy of the community in order to help him attain the state of arhathood. In short, then the council was able to be united, gathered. Ananda, primarily, Utpali, and Mahakashapa. They repeated in the presence of the 500 arhats all the teachings that they remembered that the Buddha had given. In particular, we attribute a perfect memory to these arhats due to their realization. They can remember perfectly and without error the teachings they had heard. So then they kept through memory and then later on by writing down the Buddhist teachings. If you remember, I mentioned that the entirety of the Buddhist teachings are divided into what we call the Chipitaka, the three baskets, the three sections of the Buddhist teachings, which are made up of a section called the Sutras, a section called the Vinaya, and the Abhidharmas. The Vinaya primarily focuses on Shila, ethical discipline, but not only. The Sutras primarily focus on Samadhi, but not only. They also include themes such as wisdom, but in any case, that's the main theme. And the Abhidharmas mainly focus on knowledge and wisdom. As this text is a sutra, the thus have I heard, the I here is the Buddhist disciple Ananda, because Ananda is the one who repeated all of the sutras during the first council. And then Utpali repeated, he was an expert in the Vinaya. He stated all of the Vinaya, and Mahakashapa, the Abhidharmas. So this, thus have I heard, the I here, the one who is reporting this teaching to us during the first council, which was held near Rajagriha. Well, this I, most commentaries say that this I is Ananda. However, in some commentaries, there are various opinions on this subject. Concerning the Heart Sutra, there are many commentaries. In the Buddhist canon, in its Tibetan translation, there are two main parts. The first part are the teachings of the Buddha, what we call the translation of the teachings, the words of the Buddha's commandments, we could say Kongjur. Ka is an honorific term for word in Tibetan. So word or teachings in the honorific sense of the Buddha. So these are its translations. And then there's another art that includes close to 100 volumes, depending on the editions. No, this section has 100 volumes, and then there's another section which is called the Tengyur. Ten is a shortening of Tenchu, which is the translation of the Sanskrit word Shastra, which refers to the treatises. This refers to all of the texts by masters other than the Buddha that treat the Buddha's teachings, that make implicit points explicit, and to gather together points that are spread throughout the teachings and gather them together to offer shortened presentations to make them more coherent. In any case, to make the Buddha's teaching more accessible. In this section, this concerns originally the texts that were written in Indian languages, and the Tibetan translations are almost, except for a few exceptions, they are primarily based on the Sanskrit versions of the Buddhist teachings. These scholars, today's scholars, do not think that the Buddha taught in Sanskrit. It's generally accepted that the Buddha taught in a common language, probably the language of northern India. Certain affirm that this would have been the Pali language, but others say that that language is probably from Western India. In any case, it would have been a language that's very close to Pali. We don't know exactly precisely what language it was. In any case, the Buddha's teachings were later on translated or presented in the academic language of India. It's, in fact, somewhat curious choice, but in any case, that was the primary academic language in India at the time. That was the language that was chosen, particularly for the text of the Great Vehicle. So the Tibetan translations were mainly based on Sanskrit text. So coming back to this, thus have I heard. In the Tenjur, we find several commentaries, specific commentaries about the Heart Sutra. In English, for the Anglophones who are interested, there are translations of these various commentaries that can be found. I believe that there are 8 commentaries, Indian commentaries, and all of these 8 commentaries were translated. And then there are also a great number of commentaries by Tibetan masters later on that commentate and explain based on the Indian commentaries and on other treatises, and give explanations about the Heart Sutra. So there are a great number of commentaries and explanations. And today, concerning the Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom, given that it's a short text, it's a text that is often recited, and that's also important not only in the Himalayan region, where Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, we could call it, dominates, but also within Mahayana Buddhism in a larger sense, for example, in China, in Japan, Korea, etc. In these countries, this text is also recited daily. And of course, it exists in China, Chinese, and all of these various language, as well as commentaries are available in these languages. And we find the text and commentaries, certain commentaries available today in French and English. Scholars who have offered their own commentaries of this text. So coming back to this I, thus have I heard, not all of the commentaries agree that this I is Ananda. Some say that I cannot be Ananda because the premise of the text is not the teaching for the Shravakas. It is a teaching that was intended for the bodhisattvas, and it must have been a bodhisattva who had collected it. And so others say that it would have been Bodhisattva Manjushri. Other commentaries are a bit more compromising. And they say, well, as a Shravaka practitioner, we can hear teachings from the Great Vehicle without necessarily fully understanding the meaning. So it's possible that this I is Ananda. This is just to give you the idea that there are certain discussions we can find in the various commentaries that don't all agree. Evam ha Shrutam is the term in Sanskrit. In this term, thus, some commentaries say that all the sutras begin with this term, thus, and in the word thus alone, all of the Buddha's 88,000 teachings can be understood. Thus, evam. Often it's written in beautiful calligraphic script, lenza or vartu, and there are masters who give commentary on this term, thus, and how we can understand the entirety of the Buddha's 88,000 teachings through this word. As we saw, the depth of the teaching, the more that the Buddha is addressing, the greater the capacity of the audience that the Buddha is addressing, the fewer words he needs, in fact. And to the extent that the teachings are more limited in capacity, the more words there are. We can already see there are two parts in this sutra, in the body of the text. There's the prologue and the epilogue, of course. And then there's the body of the text in the middle. The body of the text is divided into two parts. There's an extensive, detailed explanation. And the commentary says this is intended for disciples of lesser capacity. Then there is a shortened version that is intended for disciples of higher capacity. And the sutra in its entirety can be summarized in the term Teyata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisoha, or by which disciples of much higher capacity can understand emptiness, as well as the process by which prajnaparamita, that understands emptiness, is actualized. The 5 paths of the bodhisattva, in other words. Thus have I heard. Vam na shutam ekasyami, I believe. Once. This designates the moment, once, when this teaching took place. Certain commentaries say in a moment, in one moment. The tradition attributes to the Buddha great pedagogical capacity, notably that there are several points. First, the Buddha's teaching is what his disciples perceived. What we have access to is the perception of the disciples. We don't directly have access to the Buddha's understanding. We have access to what the disciples perceived. The understanding of the disciples depends on their own disposition, their own ability. Buddha, as a Buddha, offered access, and due to his realization, he was able to offer access to enlightenment to all in the manner that was most relevant for them. So there are variations in understanding, but they're not choices made by the Buddha. They depend, in fact, on the one who is receiving, one who receives the Buddha's teaching. So, of course, here, what we can understand is that an important point is when we think about the teaching, ordinarily, we think about an opinion, a doctrine, a certain elaboration, or the formulation of something. And then, of course, this implies language, signs, symbols, representations, images, concepts. When we speak, we can never show a thing itself. We're always using a symbol, a reference to designate something. That's the process of language. We're always using reference to designate something that exists, something else that's real. All of our understanding occurs based only on these references, these signs. There's no direct access. And furthermore, teaching, so far as we're concerned, is always biased. It's a specific view. When someone teaches something, they teach from a specific angle, their understanding, their way of seeing. All doctrines, all teachings arise from this in a certain way. But the Buddha, due to his enlightenment, had access to realizing what is real, free from all confusion. The Buddha's teaching, in that sense, the Buddha couldn't teach something biased or a reference point or a point of view, which leads certain commentaries to say that, in fact, the Buddha never said a single word. From the moment of his enlightenment up through his parinirvana, the Buddha never spoke a single word. This underlines that the Buddha was simply in the real, and due to his presence, due to his grace, he gave beings access to the real, and they heard it, they understood it, they perceived it according to their own capacities, from which arose the three vehicles, the various expressions. All of these expressions only refer to reality as it is, and particularly had a soteriological vocation. They were intended to allow his disciples to access freedom from suffering by this access to an understanding of reality, by developing wisdom. The texts express this. They give access to this, but as we saw, via the understanding of the disciples, and we can't limit the Buddha to these expressions, to these words, because they only reflect the perception of his disciples. Some commentaries say once, not just in a place, but in one moment, simultaneously, Buddha was in the intemporal, and in one moment he gave all of the teachings on the perfection of wisdom, but which spread out over time for beings who had a perception that was still connected with duality. Then comes the term, the glorious one, Bhagavan. This same term, we saw it in the title, designating the perfection of wisdom. Through the term Bhagavati, that's the feminine form of Bhagavan, because wisdom here is represented with a feminine form in its a capacity for giving birth to enlightenment. This term, according to the etymology, has several meanings. And it's translated in Tibetan by Chomtente. There is a meaning of vanquer, one who vanquishes, victor. Then there's a quality, the aspect of all the qualities of fortune, one who transcends, one who goes beyond. Chomtente. The three meanings are present in the Tibetan. When we talk about vanquishing, this designates in particular the fact that the Buddha vanquished or dissipated the two obscurations, the two veils. In Tibetan, the term is Drikpa. Obscurations, obstacles, which are afflictions, Nyumon Tripa, and the second is Sheje Tripa, knowledge or obscurations to omniscience, obscurations that prevent omniscience. The first form of obscuration is what is eliminated by the Shravakas and the Bodhisattvas. Afflictions in the Abhidharmas, in general, there are the three poisons: confusion, desire, aversion. Then in the Abhidharmas, there's a more exhaustive list. The 6 root afflictions and the 20 subsidiary or related afflictions. So you can also find these kinds of more detailed lists. In general, or in short, afflictions are what are directly the cause of rebirth, perpetuation in samsara, and the experience of suffering. To vanquish. The one who vanquishes all the afflictions, and even the most subtle obscurations that allow for actualizing omniscience. These are more subtle veils that are eliminated entirely on the path of the bodhisattvas, but not but according to certain commentaries, not necessarily by the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddhas. Bhagavan designates, in short, all the obscurations that are afflictions in nature and obscurations that are subtle dispositions, subtle tendencies connected to our confusion. All these that hinder omniscience, all of these are completely dissipated. In addition to this, in other texts, there's this term chum, vanquish, is mentioned to also designate having vanquished the mahas. The term mara often in English, it's often like the Tibetan term du, a kind of demon. The demons are destroyed. What are the demons? There are 4 demons. The demon of the aggregates, Ganda Mara. The second one, Umpu. And the third one is the Klesha Mara. Oh, sorry, that's all the second one, Klesha Mara. And the third is the Maharana Mara, the Mara of death. And the fourth is the sons of gods or divinities, Lai Vidu Devaputra Mara in Sanskrit. These 4 maras are completely eliminated. What can we understand in terms of these 4 maras? What do they designate? The first one, the aggregates, our own aggregates that we have appropriated, that we grasp as being I, me. They are Mara in the sense that they are the basis for suffering. They are what limits us. The Mara of afflictions, of course, are the afflictions. The power that perpetuates grasping the aggregates. So conditioned existence, the conditioning forces, if you will. And then there's the Mara of death. What causes death is impermanence, change. This designates the absence of freedom, the instability that we encounter going from life to life. the fact that against our own will, in fact, no one wants to die, but nevertheless, we all must die. This is perpetual transmigration, the fact that we take rebirth and then die, and we'll have to take rebirth again and then die. And so, in this sense, it is also what limits us, what hinders us, what hinders our freedom. And then there's Devaputra, the sons of deities, or gods, which is described as being a god of the desire world, desire realm, who hinders our ability to vanquish the three other Maras, who prevents us from vanquishing the Mara of death, the Mara of afflictions, and the Mara of the aggregate. It's represented by a deity who sees, via their clairvoyance, disciples who seek out liberation and omniscience. He has a bow and arrows that are desire, hatred, pride, jealousy, and he shoots them into the hearts of disciples who wish to liberate themselves. These arrows are like flowers. When he shoots them, they don't create any wound, but in the heart of these disciples, they create this desire, anger, pride, jealousy, etc. It's a kind of personification of reality that we can clearly see when we seek to practice, when we wish to vanquish the afflictions, when we wish to liberate ourselves from this conditioned state. In short, this demon is, I think, we can present it as distraction. It is our tendency of mind to become distracted, and that's a demon in a way. Even if we want to, even if we have the will to vanquish the afflictions, there is a certain attraction, a disposition for being distracted that is present, that hinders us, that prevents us, and is, in this sense, a demon, a Mara. Then the commentaries explain when are these Maras vanquished. For example, the Mara of afflictions is completely eliminated on the 8th Bodhisattva level. The Mara of death is vanquished on the first Bhumi, but not its subtle aspect of transmigration, which is only vanquished when one obtains enlightenment. And due to this, the Mara of death and the Mara of the aggregates exist until attainment of complete enlightenment. The Mara that is a deity, because it prevents us from vanquishing the three other Maras. It exists so long as these other three Maras are present. And thus we can see in the presentation of the Buddha's life, in very imagery rich way, when the Buddha vanquishes the deity Mara the night before his enlightenment, when he is almost about to attain enlightenment, Mara tries to distract him by sending very beautiful, very beautiful daughters. And then the Buddha remains impassive, undistracted. Then Mara sends an army, but all of the weapons turn to flowers. Mara is desperate and he says, "What right do you have to become a Buddha? You should stay within my power." And then the Buddha says, "By right of my virtue." And Mara says, "Who is witness to your virtue?" And then the Buddha touches his hand to the ground and said, "The earth is my witness. For 3 infinite kalpas, I accumulated merit and wisdom. I gave my life to others for the benefit of others more times than we can imagine." The earth begins to tremble, and the earth manifests and says, "I saw the Buddha. I am the witness to his great virtue and compassion." So, of course, it's a lot of kind of imagery to help us imagine how the 4 Maras are vanquished. And due to this term, Bhagavat, this is the way that we use this term, vanquish, one who has vanquished, a victor. The next part, 10, means endowed with, meaning that all the qualities, that all the potential, all the capacities of mind, abilities, minds, possibilities are acquired, attained, actualized. You can remember yesterday we discussed the term prajnaparamita. We looked at the prajnaparamita of the fruit, when all of our capacities for intelligence and understanding are completely actualized. And then in this sense, all of the potential of a Buddha is fully actualized. Chum ten he. Then omniscience, wisdom of a Buddha This indicates that his wisdom is complete and perfect, that the marvelous realization of the Buddha. Then there's this term te, transcendence. That's how it's translated in Tibetan. There's a twofold sense in the Sanskrit. In Bhagavan, of Bhag, which is vanquish, and also fortune endowed with qualities, the one who is excellent. And the Tibetan, in a certain way, took the essential points of the etymology and then put these three words together: vanquish, endowed with, and transcended. Chom and e, which transcends, which goes beyond. And what has gone beyond what exactly? Gone beyond conditioned existence and of samsara, and also beyond the solitary peace of the arhat. This nirvana of nirvana, this liberation from conditioned existence, but which is not the actualization of our complete potential. The Buddha went beyond these two extremes in this way. All of this is in the term Bhagavan. So, of course, the term glorious here is quite imperfect as a translation. There was a very important master who translated, who was called Kumarajiva. He was one of the first important translators who translated into Chinese. He knew Sanskrit and Chinese very well. There were older translations, but he retranslated all of them, and he said something concerning the translation that stays with me because it's very true. He said, translations are like if you have a great chef who's preparing a delicious meal, and he presents it to you, and someone takes the meal and chews it up and then spits it out in a bowl and then serves it to you. That's translation. It's the same thing, but it doesn't have the same taste or the same at all. This is often the problem with translation. Of course, there are good translations, but I think there's a Latin saying. I can't remember what it was in Latin, but translate is to translate is to betray. Translation is never perfect. So if you really want to appreciate the taste of the text, you'll have to learn the language. Not to have to eat what has already been chewed. Let's take our break now. See you in half an hour.
Diye tamche zikpa nye toni nye pe ranam pamche cheka nache palap chupai sibe sole rowa rowar sho. Hu sanje chodan zoje chonam lai chanchu pardo dāne chāpsu chī dāgē jīnsu jībē sūnām chī rōlā bēnchir sāngjī rūpār shū sāngjī chūdān sūjī chūnām Jamsu Dage Jinsu Jibe Sunam Jin Ru Lai Benjir Sanjin Ru Bar Shu Sanjin Chöda Jonam Lai Chanju Pardo Dane Jamsu Chi Dage Jinsu Jibe Sunam Chi Penjire sanje drobar sho. Chomden de jambe yang lai chan tsai lo. Kange lo dre dim nye dren dra nye tara nam da rab sarve. Chi nye dun kun chi chen si chi ni je tokara le bam zen. Kanda si be tsun ra ma ri mun tuma dong ra che sarve. Rozo gyun la bu je dar se yan la zhu ju yang den song ru dar che ro nyu mo nye long le che cha ro ro se che ma re mu se dong ra nyu gu chi nye chun ze ra zhe nam de ne ta jin sa chu tar yun den lu zo ger se tu yu ko chu cha chu da chu ni jin da lu mu se ren jian be yang la du zi din chu ji chen ra wu zi ri chi da lu de mo men ba rab sa ne ga da ding ju xiong lu dou ba lu zhi bo be nang wa zar du so.
So let's continue with the text. Thus have I heard once the moment when the Buddha was present with his disciples, etc. This moment. As we saw, according to certain commentaries, the once or can also be in one moment. This can designate the moment when the Buddha taught the perfection of wisdom during the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma. There's not really a precise consensus concerning the date, if I may, the historic date of this moment. Then we saw Bhagavat, Bhagavan, the glorious one. Here we can say that in the text, certain commentaries talk about five marvels: the presence of the marvelous teacher, marvelous place, a marvelous moment, a marvelous audience, and a marvelous teaching. So these 5 points are presented here in the prologue. So in the common prologue, first there is the place, the time, the assembly, and the master. And then following this, we see the teaching. The Buddha, here designated by this title, the Bhagavan, that we looked at the meaning of this morning, was residing at Vulture's Peak in Rajgriha. Rajgriha. Rajagriha means, I believe, the place of a residence of the king, literally. The royal residence, we could say. At the time of the Buddha, India, as we know it today, as a single whole country, was made up of various distinct countries with political organization and political and social organization that were different. Some were kingdoms, some were kind of proto-republics. Indian history books talk about the Mahajanapada, the great countries of India around the Ganges basin. One of these great countries was the kingdom of Magadha. At the time of the Buddha, there was a king named Bibimsara who ruled over this country, and Rajagriha was the capital, the king's residence. King Bibimsara had already met the Buddha before his enlightenment and was very inspired by him, invited him to come to his kingdom, and became a disciple and benefactor of Buddhism. Around this place, there are 5 hills, 5 mountains. One of them is called the aggregate of the vultures. That's translated simply by Vulture's Peak. Grita Putta Bhavarta in Sanskrit. The mountain of the assembly of vultures. There are various reasons explaining why this name was given. One of them says that at this site, the vultures gathered. Other commentaries say that at this site, there are very large stones that are shaped like vultures. This location is a pilgrimage site. We can visit it, and indeed, there are large boulders. We can imagine that it's like vultures being gathered there. Anyway, these are the explanations given. And it's close to Rajkriya, the marvelous place. Then other commentaries explain also that due to the presence of the Buddha in this place and the teachings that he gave in this place became a pilgrimage site. It became a kind of natural stupa, a place of reverence, a support for offering. Various other qualities are described, but we'll try to keep moving here. I think we've looked at this in the past. Then there's the presence of the assembly. Together with a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. So this concerns the entourage of the Buddha. There are two terms, monks, which translates the Sanskrit term bhikshu. There are different etymologies given for the term bhikshu. The root bhiksh means divided or shared. One who wishes that we share with them. The Tibetan for this, or the Tibetan, in fact, uses the term gelong, one who pursues or one who makes a request for virtue. Who requests or who pursues virtue. The explanation given here is one who is on a quest for the virtue that is nirvana, and all the virtues that are in accordance with nirvana. A monk is one who is on a quest for the virtue of nirvana. That's the meaning that we can give to this term bhikshu. Another commentary offers another etymology. They bring the term bhiksh from Baharish, which is destroys or destruction. A monk is one who destroys the afflictions. A bhikshu is one who will destroy all the mental afflictions. The term assembly here translates the term sangha, a great sangha of bhikshu, and a great sangha of bodhisattvas, if you want to say with the Sanskrit. Here we translated monks for bhikshu and assembly for sangha. The Master Chandrakirti explains, a sangha is those who are not separate from the Buddha's enlightenment, from the excellent teaching of the Buddha, who are not hindered by the maras. It is the assembly is those who gather around enlightenment and who are not hindered by the maras, who we mentioned earlier, who or that. The Tibetan translates sangha by Gen Dun, which literally means aspires to virtue. The assembly of all those who aspire to the virtue of liberation. An assembly must include at least 4 monks, or must comprise at least 4 monks. If there is this term, Kendun Kunchok, or Sangha Ratna, the assembly that is a jewel. Kunchok is a Tibetan term for rare and sublime, and this concerns a designation, a particular designation for the members of the Sangha, particularly in terms of the refuge. This is the jewel. When we take refuge in the 3 jewels, when we take refuge in the jewel that is the rare and sublime. This concerns members of the Sangha who have attained the Darshana Marga, the path of seeing, according to the Shravaka vehicle or the Bodhisattva vehicle. Then these assemblies are also defined as being great, a great assembly. Not a little assembly, it's a great assembly. Great, of course, can be understood to refer to a number, that there's a great number of bhikshu that are present. But certain commentaries also understand this to mean great not only in terms of number, but great in terms of the greatness of their qualities. That they had qualities of understanding and discernment and ability that are great. So that's part of the marvelous audience. The other part of the marvelous audience is made up of bodhisattvas. We can also comment this term bodhisattva, bodhi meaning enlightenment. This comes from the verbal root bud, awakened. And sattva, those who have the intention of attaining enlightenment, of awakening. There are various ways to understand sattva. One way can be in terms of a person, a sentient being. So this may be a person who is pursuing enlightenment. The second way of understanding sattva is in terms of this term chitta, which means mind, and also intention. A bodhisattva is one who has a mind or intention directed towards enlightenment. The third way of understanding sattva is in terms of the meaning courage, strength and courage. One who has the courage and the strength to direct themselves toward enlightenment, to go towards enlightenment. The Tibetan translation kept these meanings, Chongchu Thempa, the term Chongchu, which translates Bodhi. There's a twofold meaning. The Tibetan etymology enriches the Sanskrit term even further in terms of Chang, which means both purify and also completely instructed. One who is completely instructed, who has completely familiarized themselves with. And Chu refers to accomplishment. So here we can understand this as Chang in terms of a bodhisattva is one who seeks to purify all flaws, all defects of our distraction and affliction, and who wishes to attain all of the qualities. And in this way, they are purified and accomplished. We could also look at it in the sense that they have perfectly studied the two truths, Chonghua, completely instructed. They perfectly know the meaning of the truths, and they have accomplished their meaning. And the term sempa translates the Sanskrit sattva, and sem keeps this meaning of intention or mind. And pa, there are two kinds of pa. This can be a nominal termination, or there's another spelling of pa that means pa of pao in terms of heroic or courageous. And that translates the other meaning that we saw of sattva, one who has courage. This is the meaning of the term bodhisattva. In short, this concerns members of monks, of course, designates first and foremost, but not only, those who are committed to and engaging on the vehicle of the Shravakas, those who follow the rules of the Vinaya, and the Bodhisattvas can also be monks, but they may also not be monks, not be specifically following the rules of the Vinaya, but rather they follow the rules of conduct connected with Bodhisattva vows. And these vows include in a certain sense, they go further than vows of individual liberation. In the audience, it seems that the monks and bodhisattvas, we could say, some perceive the bodhisattvas here as being rather divine beings. They may also be human, but a great number of divine beings. So the distinction is particularly in terms of two levels, those of lesser capacity and those of higher capacity, designated by the term bodhisattvas. The Shravakas in general primarily work for their own liberation. They wish to liberate themselves from conditioned existence and attain nirvana, whereas bodhisattvas work for the benefit of being and do not wish for enlightenment only for themselves. They don't simply wish for liberation from conditioned existence, but they also wish to liberate all beings and attain full and perfect enlightenment, or all beings. So we can say that they go further. This is a deeper approach toward full and perfect enlightenment. What makes one a bodhisattva is having generated bodhicitta, the intention of attaining enlightenment for all beings, which involves having sincerely, truly experiencing love and compassion for all beings without exception. And this intention is a great quality, very important quality. Buddhist texts, particularly in the Great Vehicle, praise this quality and compare them, give various analogies for them. This intention is like the earth because it is the basis for all qualities. It is like gold because it doesn't change until enlightenment. There are no variations or imperfections. It is like the waxing moon because it only grows in quality, like a fire that destroys all obstructions to omniscience, like a treasure that satisfies the needs of all beings. There are numerous examples given to illustrate the quality of bodhicitta. In short, in terms of bodhicitta, we distinguish relative bodhicitta from ultimate bodhicitta. Samvritti bodhicitta, saramartha bodhicitta. It's the same term in terms of the truths. Samvritti refers to seeming or a semblance of bodhicitta. It's the one that we begin to cultivate as an ordinary being that is still connected with dualistic grasping, that has not yet realized emptiness, that has not yet truly developed the perfection of wisdom. But we can aspire to enlightenment and wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. This intention constitutes the basis for developing bodhicitta. Then this is a theming bodhicitta or resemblance of bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta, which involves two aspects: the aspect of aspiration, the wish, the intention of attaining enlightenment for the benefit of other beings, and then the other, which is commitment, a practical commitment that we engage in truly working towards enlightenment through study, reflection, putting into practice. These are the two aspects of relative bodhicitta. Then there's ultimate bodhicitta, which is connected with, as we saw yesterday, the perfection of wisdom. When this perfection of wisdom is truly actualized, this is when we attain the first bodhisattva ground, in other words, the path of seeing. Concretely, the path begins by the path of the bodhisattvas begins by sincerely having this aspiration to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, and then we concretely commit to receiving bodhisattva vows and following the precepts of bodhisattvas. And when we begin to put the path into practice, this is by cultivating the four immeasurables: love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, and making effort to practice giving and sharing our knowledge, cultivating the 6 paramitas that we mentioned yesterday: dana, giving; shila, ethical discipline; shanti, patience; virya, perseverance; dhyana, calm, mental stability; and prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, which is the subject of our text. And then, at that time, the Glorious One abided evenly in the samadhi of the aspects of phenomena called appearance of the profound. Also at that time, the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, beholding the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, observed that even the 5 aggregates are empty of substance. At that moment, at that time, designates the moment when all of these people are assembled in this place, and particularly there is the moment when this teaching is integrated, when the virtuous dispositions of the audience matured in order to receive this teaching. At that time refers to this. And the glorious one we saw abided evenly in the samadhi. Samadhi, this term, is very difficult to translate. There are several terms that we see in Buddhist literature, but which are often confused into or mixed into the same term, meditation. It's important to correctly distinguish them. There is a general term, the term bhavana, which is gom in Tibetan, bhavana in Sanskrit, gom in Tibetan, which is commonly designated by the word meditation in English in Buddhist texts. There's also another term, dhyana, which is often translated as meditation. And there is the term samadhi, also often translated by meditation, and then other words, sometimes concentration or absorption, that can be used by translators. It's important to, we can establish the conventions that we wish to, but the important point is to distinguish the English meaning of a term in its habitual usage of the word that it is trying to translate from Sanskrit. If we take the English word meditation, the habitual meaning, the definition of meditation, doesn't completely offer the meaning of bhavana or kom. I've heard somewhere that, in fact, bhavana, the word meditation, was used to designate Buddhist practices by the Jesuits. I believe it was someone in Japan who was discussing with some Zen monks and who then replied, "Oh, yes, that's a bit like what we do. We call it meditation." And then they also called it meditation. And this kind of entered into the literature. But in English, the term meditation is an activity that is active and discursive. It's reflecting on something in a deep way. There are other terms, like the term contemplation, which can include passively observing. There's an English Buddhist vocabulary that still needs to be determined. But in any case, I can explain the term bhavana in general to you. In Sanskrit, this means to make be or to make become. In other words, in this sense of cultivating. And this is the meaning that has been kept in the Tibetan translation kom. Kom is a general term that designates a great number of exercises. For example, in certain cases, tam ninche kompa. Tam is love and kindness. We could say meditating love and compassion. So what do we understand about this when we say it in English? Reflecting on it? But in any case, bhavana, gom, means cultivating love and compassion. The idea here is we've become aware of a certain attitude, the attitude of kindness, and now we're going to familiarize ourselves with this attitude, make an effort or work towards the fact that our attitude towards others is primarily that of love. When we say meditate, if we translate Gom Bhavana in this way, this, in fact, it's more a sense, a meaning of cultivating a certain quality. But we can also use this term related to the meditation of samatha. And then in this sense, meditating shamatha is cultivating shamatha. The objective that we're seeking is that our mind abides in calm. So there's this aspect of cultivating shamatha, and Trinlay Rinpoche in Tibetan. We can also find this term mitakpa gompa, meditating on impermanence. And then here it's different. It's not about making impermanence be or come about. It's familiarizing ourselves with the understanding of impermanence. We're not familiar with impermanence. We're grasping impermanence. We think we're going to live forever, that things won't change. So this may be a discursive reflection. The term bhavana doesn't imply that something is discursive or non-discursive. It implies familiarizing ourselves with or cultivating something. That's the general meaning. That's the general meaning. Then there are more precise terms, like this term samadhi. The term samadhi is sometimes translated by concentration in English. There are various etymologies for the term samadhi. In Hinduism, they use this term as well, but they define it differently than in Buddhism. They separate sam, adi in terms of superior, to join what is superior or transcendent. That's not the definition given in Buddhism. It's the definition is translated into Tibetan by Ting Nidzin, sama, and then ji, the verbal root di, which means to hold. This is translated into Tibetan by Tsinpa, to hold. And then sama, which means natural calm, mind's natural calm. Holding mind's natural calm. This is samadhi or chinyadzin. So there are different types of samadhi. And then there's also this term dhyana. Dhyana also involves this idea of particularly connects with the idea of mental stability, and particularly designates various degrees of calm that we can attain, different levels of samatha, levels of calm that we can attain. For example, there are dhyanas of the rupa dhatu and dhyanas of the arupa dhatu, the form realm and the formless realm, and that designate various levels of calm that are ever more tranquil or subtle. And in both cases, they refer to a state of immobility, calm, serenity of mind that is connected above all with shamatha, but does not exclude vipassana. Sometimes samadhi, this immobility that includes vipassana, it doesn't always only refer to samatha. For jhana, some translators translated this in terms of meditative absorption. It's always really an approximation. It's better to know the original term. Buddha enters into samadhi. In the description of the text, it may make us think that the Buddha was not in samadhi and then he entered into samadhi. So first he wasn't in a meditative absorption and then he entered into meditative absorption. Sitting in meditation, if you will, he sat down, began meditating. We can imagine it like this when we read the text. Certain commentaries explain that this divided evenly in samadhi is the action by which the Buddha brought his audience to ripen. He brought about the ripening of his audience so that they could hear this teaching on the perfection of wisdom. And the meaning of this samadhi then became accessible to the audience. He entered into this samadhi so that his audience could have access to the samadhi themselves. Other commentaries also underline here that the Buddha appeared to be entering into samadhi, but ultimately, from an ultimate perspective, the Buddha, as a Buddha, is constantly and in an uninterrupted way in samadhi. And in an uninterrupted way, he offers access to enlightenment and turns the wheel of the Dharma, of the teaching. In terms of categories, it's a specific samadhi focused on phenomena, aspects of phenomena. This term phenomena translates the term dharma from the verbal root dri, which means to hold, meaning all that holds characteristics. Lakshana, everything that has specific and general characteristics, is considered phenomena. In short, everything that is the object of thought or objects of knowledge. Here, categories of phenomena refers to the 5 aggregates, the 12 ayatanas, the 18 dhatus, etc. This samadhi is designated by a name. It is called appearance of the profound. So in general, the term samo is profound, which designates emptiness. And then the other term here, appearance, is this Sanskrit term avabhasa, which means perception, appearance, splendor, light. It can have all of these different meanings. It is a samadhi that includes the emptiness of all phenomena, that understands the emptiness of all phenomena. It is, in short, the wisdom by which the profound appears. It's a wisdom to which the emptiness of all phenomena appears. It is also light, appearance in terms of light that illuminates and dissipates all of the obscurity of ignorance. Certain commentaries also connect perception and profound. In other words, ordinary beings do not see what is profound. They don't see the emptiness of phenomena. They grasp the appearances of phenomena. Bodhisattvas may have access to what is profound, but when they see what is profound, they don't see appearances. When they see appearances, they don't see the profound. Only a Buddha can see appearances and the profound without confusion, both at the same time, in short. The vision of a Buddha here is completely direct and complete and perfect. It's their wisdom. This is underlined here by this term, according to some. According to certain commentaries, it is explained in this way. I'll leave things here to give some space for questions. Time goes quickly. Is it helpful to you to read the text and go through one by one? Rinpoche, can you tell us the difference between Sherab and Yeshe in terms of the perfection of wisdom? Yeshe. Ye means original, principle, atemporal, intemporal, and she is knowledge. So this designates this capacity for knowing, this intelligence of mind, this clarity of mind in its original quality, free from all confusion, from all veils, etc. This is Yeshe. Yesterday, we talked about the term Sharab quite a bit, prajna in general. Prajna, as we saw, is our intelligence, our ability for knowing. And as much now in terms of dualistic grasping, and also in terms of prajna, that is paramita, that is a discernment that is excellent, superior to all others. It is the most superior knowledge, one that is free of all bias of any kind. And so here we saw that there is also a prajna that is natural, the natural prajnaparamita. That is the same thing as Yeshe, if you will, but non-actualized. When we are in the state of confusion, then we talk about Buddha nature. And when it is actualized, fully actualized, then it is really Yeshe that is actualized. So they're synonyms. The questioner says the nature of mind is the same thing. Rinpoche says the nature of mind, Buddha nature, refers to this natural prajnaparamita, or Yeshe, this quality, the most subtle aspect of mind when all confusion, all bias is removed. This is a quality of mind that is not currently actualized, that is not recognized due to Adventist veil. Prajnaparamita is present when natural prajnaparamita is present when Yeshe is actualized. Now, in the present moment, we can talk about prajna as a quality, prajnaparamita as a term or a concept of the perfection of wisdom, of the reality of phenomena. And then from this understanding, there's a development of this discernment, of this intelligence, if you will, that increases through contemplative exercise, that results in the perfection of ultimate wisdom. But at the present moment, even though it suggests a reflection of wisdom, we still we use this term, the perfection of wisdom. Hello, Rinpoche. Could you develop a bit more the aspect concerning the fact that the Buddha, we can feel that if the Buddha wasn't there, present in meditative absorption, this exchange between the bodhisattvas couldn't have occurred. So how does this work, that his presence influences others in a way? And this is what I think the commentaries designate with this at that time. The roots of virtuous merit that beings have, in other words, this positive disposition that we have to hear this teaching, reached maturity, and the Buddha through his grace, could influence these beings through his presence. He was able to offer them access to this understanding by entering into samadhi. He created the circumstances in a way. We can see that in this sutra, the Buddha doesn't talk. It's a discussion between Shariputra, a Shravaka, and Avalokiteshvara, a Bodhisattva. And at the end, the Buddha confirms and gives his approval for the explanation that Avalokiteshvara gave. It's the teaching of the Buddha in the sense that it is a presentation that was made in his presence and that he confirms and that occurred through his influence. It's interesting. This shows how subtle things are in terms of the Buddha. It's inexpressible. What he expresses refers to something that's already in a certain way a biased vision. Authentic, correct, beneficial, but an image, a representation. Because relying on language, because it relies on language. Hello. Hello? I think you answered my question partly by answering someone else's question, but I wanted to know if Vipassana is, in a way, the consequence, the fruit of diligent practice of shamatha. Is Vipassana naturally present or possible for our minds, but it follows? Can Vipassana be accomplished in a session sitting on the cushion, but also in everything? Okay, there is an aspect of a Vipassana that is, if I may say, conceptual. That involves conceptually understanding how we stray, how we misunderstand, having a concept or a representation, but that is unbiased. That will serve as the foundation for what we're looking to surpass. We'll talk about this later, but it's necessary to clearly see what we are criticizing in the way that we grasp at a self. What does this really designate so that we can apply analysis to it? What we need to know what we are going to surpass. What is the ignorance that we are going to eliminate? So there's a first part of Vipassana. Vipassana can be a kind of synonym for prajna. In the context of Mahayana, prajnaparamita, to begin, we need to acquire the prajnaparamita that is the fruit of listening to the teachings. And then we need to continue with reflection. This could be sitting, this could be walking. The posture is not the important thing. It's necessary to arrive at an analysis ourselves of what is explained in the teachings. And the fruit of this analysis leads to a comprehension and understanding that goes beyond concepts. And parallel to this, we practice shamatha. From the beginning, we start practicing shamatha just for mental calm. And this mental calm will be able to continue It allows for the fruit of our analysis. What we have discovered, in fact, if there's no shamatha, it can get lost. It's like a flame that's lit in the wind. It won't light. It won't be a light long, and then it will go out. The wind, of course, is our distractions, etc. Vipassana is like glass that we might put around the flame, a protection for what is discerned. Samatha and Vipassana are united, they go together. Progress in practice occurs on the basis of the union of shamatha and Vipassana. Vipassana, in other words, understanding the emptiness of phenomena, first in a conceptual way. We'll have knowledge, we'll say, oh, yes, that's what it is. But in our way of thinking or seeing, it remains based on a representation of something. We don't have direct access. And then over time, with a calm mind, we'll be able to have direct access. So ultimately, this occurs in sitting meditation. For a beginner, it starts with listening and reflecting. And then, of course, later it occurs through samadhi. So in a certain way, maybe that's not the expression, but Vipassana is a first-person experience sitting on the cushion. It's an experience. It's not something arising from our confusion. Well, how do we distinguish this? When we say an experience, this implies duality. There's a subject that is experiencing something, whereas here we have seen that the perfection of wisdom is without duality. It is non-conceptual, free of representations. It is free of subject and object. It's not an experience in this way. It is an intelligence, a knowledge, a discernment that is described, in fact, in the way of non-observation. It is not a subject that discerns something specific. It discerns that there is nothing to discern. It is beyond grasping, beyond dualistic grasping. We'll come back to this subject. The important point is to be able to see, what are we grasping? What does self-grasping mean? What does substantial grasping mean? This is what we need to understand in order to see, to understand what we seek to surpass. I wanted to come back to what you said concerning the teachings. I wanted to make sure I understood. You said that the Buddha, there were 88,000 teachings of the Buddha. Are they all in the same way as the one that we're studying, given by other bodhisattvas? So this term, the 88,000, I don't think it's a list of 88,000 titles. It's an expression that is given in terms of the fact that the Buddha gave remedies for the 3 poisons, 21,000 remedies for desire, 21,000 for hatred, etc., and then 21,000 for all 3 of them together. His teachings are remedies. They're not discussions in this sense. They are remedies that have a soteriological value, that have benefit. They're different methods that allow us to dissipate all that is source of suffering. Then the list of texts that we have been able to gather, that's something else, in fact. The works cited of the Buddha, if you will, I'm not entirely certain of the number, but it doesn't necessarily correspond with 84,000. It's not so much in terms of the numbers, but more about the method. What I understand here is that it's not the Buddha who directly gave the teaching, but through his presence, and then he validated it. And Rinpoche says, well, for this one, but in other teachings, we hear him talk. I'm talking about this text specifically, in the Heart Sutra specifically. And in fact, we hear him talk at the end. He says, it is like this. He confirms the teaching at the end. So the Buddha's word is present. It's, reported in the text. But what the commentary points out, saying that the Buddha never spoke, is that he didn't speak in terms of the fact that the Buddha was in the ultimate. The fact that we heard him speak it's not ultimate. It's only in the conventional sense of our own perception. Beings perceived him speaking, but the Buddha himself was beyond all conditions of speaking, etc. It's a way of underlining the Buddha's realization that is beyond all discursiveness, beyond all artifice, beyond all bias. The Buddha is beyond all of this because the fact is that language is by nature biased. So in this sense, in short, it is an expression that is by nature biased. It's not necessarily false. It can be correct, it can be elegant, it can be relevant, but from an ultimate perspective, because the ultimate is inexpressible, language remains a representation, an image. But it is the image that is grasped by the listener. It's not an image that was given by the Buddha. He's beyond this. That's what I think the commentator wanted to underline. Thank you very much for listening. Bon appetit.
예, 담치 지바니 토니 니베 라남 팜치 제가나제 발람 주바이 시베 솔련 조와 조와